Good afternoon, everyone. This is Knut Rasta, the president of the Institute for the Fiduciary Standard, and this is Tuesday, September 9th, 2 p.m. Eastern Time, and we are about to convene our first September version of September Fiduciary September program, and it's RIA succession, and we have three very well-known RIA representatives speaking for us. But before we get started with the program, I would like to just make note that this is the 13th fiduciary September that the Institute has put on. In 2012, we proclaimed that forever going forward, September is not about going back to school or about football, but it is forever known as Fiduciary September. And since that time, we have tried to have what we think is the largest annual conversation among planners, advisors, experts, attorneys on the key topic of why fiduciary duties matter and what they mean. And this year we started a little bit early, sort of because of events around us. On August 7th, the president introduced his executive order regarding alternative investments in 401ks. And then on August 8th, we convened a media panel featuring Phyllis Borsey, among others, on reacting to that presidential order. And then over the next 3 days, we had a podcast. I got a op-ed up on Investment News, and so we sort of impromptu started our fiduciary activities a little bit early in that respect. So today is our first fiduciary September event, and this will be followed by 5 other panel discussions during the month of September, where we cover 4 different topics. We'll have 2 different panels on the issue of alternative investments in 401ks. And then we will have a panel discussion on the state of conflicts of interest in 2020 and 2025, and ask the question whether they still matter given everything that has happened in the industry. We will follow that with a discussion among those who are proponents of fixed, flat, or hourly fees as to why they do so, why they prefer those fee only versions, and then we're going to end the month with a discussion on, is it possible to have a bipartisan Department of Labor fiduciary rule? And so that is the highlights of our program. It is up on our website, so you can see the dates and the details. And that's what I wanted to go over first. So right now, in today's conversation, as I say, we have 3 speakers who will, in their presentations, introduce themselves and their firms. But I'll only say that we have Brian Martin from Accredited Investors, John Robertson from Abacus Planning Group, and Patrick Runyon from Modera Wealth Management. And no further ado, we'll start the opening presentations with Pat.
Thank you, Knut. Appreciate it. Really pleased to be here with Brian and John, as well as you. So I thought I could give a brief overview of the history of our firm and then get into some of the specifics around the topic we're discussing. So our firm, Modera Wealth Management, was formally founded in 1983. Gary Greenbaum, for those that may know him, was a pioneer in the fee-only financial planning firm, very early member of NAPFA. So the firm started in 83, and then in 93, which is why I keep tripping over that, is when Tom Arecchio, our current CEO, became partners with Gary. So they had a successful firm, building clients through referrals, all the way through the 2000s, and they, through NAPFA study groups and other study groups, became friendly with the firm in Boston called Back Bay Financial. And the first merger, M&A, that our firm ever did was with Back Bay in 2011. And at that time, our firm became about a $950 million AUM shop. That was as painful as it may sound to go through. So there's, that was before a lot of M&A was happening in the industry. It was two firms that had never done it before. So there were a lot of things that, you get tripped up on. I'm always fond of Tom talking about that they spent half a day talking about whether junk bonds would be part of the portfolio. And it took about 8 hours to discuss that subject. So they finally realized we got to start coming to agreement on certain things. So speed forward to today, we have AUM of about 15 billion. We have 220 some employees. We have 15 offices up and down the East Coast, and that's a result of a number of small and large M&A that we've done. So personally, I joined Modera through a merger that happened at the end of 2020 between my legacy firm, Independence Advisors, and Modera. At that same time, which is why it's appropriate for this subject, is at that time, it was when our private equity partner, Tria Capital, joined. So they did that during the transaction when our firm joined Modera. Part of the reason why we actually went with Modera is one was the long-standing relationship we had with Tom and other partners, but two was we knew the folks from Tria, in particular Ben Robbins, who had been very helpful along the way to us with really gratis advice on our kind of succession plan that we were going after. So the thing that made us comfortable at the time, and where, again, I think is relevant for this subject, is they were taking a minority interest in Modera. So they invested in two tranches, one of which did not involve voting shares. So they were really interested in letting this be an advisor-led firm and not necessarily dictating what decisions were made to run the firm day to day. They were really taking a long-term view. The capital that they were using was long-term capital from their investors. So it really fit together with what I would consider to be a fiduciary model of always putting the interests of the clients before those of the partners of the firm. And always acting that way. So having longer term private equity capital allowed us to continue to do that. So the succession plan for the firm, my previous firm, was we needed to figure out a solution. And I think a lot of RIAs, knowing that there's thousands of them out there, need to come up with a succession plan. And oftentimes, because of the success of this way of doing business, these firms have grown to a tremendous number. And I was a minority partner in my last firm. My partner owned, 90% of the shares. And it became really hard for me, and even if there were a few other partners, which there weren't at the time, figuring out a way to buy him out would have been one, either required him to take all the risks still, because he would have guaranteed any borrowing that I had to do that. Or two, it would have required me to go out and find the capital to do it, which would have been very difficult. Don't have family money, don't have the ability to go to a bank and borrow tens of millions of dollars to buy somebody out. So merging with a firm like Modera that was like-minded, similar investment philosophy, leads with planning, fiduciary standard, fee only, that was a great solution for us. And we have, as we've grown, private equity has allowed us through their capital investment to continue to be a solution for like-minded firms that need a home, but without giving up control of the firm. And that's really, I think, one of the nuances that's important here. We're very much focused on being employee controlled. We're not so much worried about the economics of, let's say, one PE firm or multiple PE firms owning more than 50% of the firm. The key really is the control and the voting shares. So we've been able to, through our partnership with our PE firm, have them sit on the board. They provide a tremendous amount of uh, uh, technical knowledge of the industry. They're great as we look to increase our technology platforms and reinvest in the firm on what other firms are doing, what's the best practice, what are the lessons because of just their participation in the marketplace with other firms. What are really being the kind of our resource for best practices. Um, so our goal is that as long as possible, that we remain majority employee controlled, and that may require us to involve another private equity firm in order to do that and make the numbers work. Where maybe they own 60 to 70% of the firm among themselves, but we still have majority control of the firm, so we can always do the things that we think are best for our clients. So it's for us, it's given us tremendous flexibility to invest in the business, to find partners that need solutions and attract talent, keep talent, and then reinvest in the latest and greatest technology and resources. We've in the last 24 months added a two different tax practices so we can start preparing taxes for clients. That's been a huge benefit to people that are having a difficult time finding tax preparers that do reasonable work for a reasonable fee. Our private investment offering has become much more robust. We are going to continue to build out our capabilities, whether it's within AI tools that we can use to do our jobs more efficiently, or just upping the current tech stack that we have to something that is again more user friendly and more efficient. So all of these things are possible because of our size and the ability we've had to grow and scale very quickly. And I think our strategic relationship with TRIA and the private equity world has allowed that to happen. So I'll
Thank you.
stop there and turn it over to the next presenter.
Thank you, Pat. The next presenter.
I think that's me.
I think that's you, John.
It's tough to follow. I almost forgot I was talking. I was so much enjoying listening to Patrick talk. So I'm with Abacus Planning Group. We're in Columbia, South Carolina. We were founded by a single founder about 27 years ago named Cheryl Holland. And when I started working at the firm 18 years ago, she'd already started divesting some of the ownership of shares that she had. Not much, but some. And so that process has already started a number of years ago. And so we've just continued down that path. We're now around $2 billion. We crossed that threshold a few months ago. Kind of hate saying it out loud because it feels so, you know, on the bubble. But we just got there this year. We have about 35 employees. And so where we are now is we're still working that plan. Cheryl's still the majority owner, but we're chipping away at it. We have another round of buy-in at the end of this year. We're 6 shareholders, and we're actively working that plan. So we're a little bit less mature than Patrick's firm. But I think for us, the biggest thing that we've been tackling hasn't necessarily been the transfer of ownership. It's been the transfer of management and governance and shifting from a founder-centric firm to a more corporate structure and what that looks like. So about 2 years ago, me and my colleague Charles Flowers, who's our Chief Investment Officer, took on the position of co-president. And that was the first time that we'd officially transitioned management responsibilities away from the founder. And so we're still in the process of that. We're 2 years into it. So we're still working that piece. I have notes I've been blissfully ignoring. So the current plan is maybe within the next 8 years or so, buy out the majority of the founder shares. We might still leave some in. We're talking about doing that, what that might look like. As we've talked about being majority employee owned, not wholly employee owned. And we're really, really working the plan of we have a management team that's not all shareholders anymore. So what does it mean to be a shareholder if you're an owner but not a manager? If you're like me, you have management responsibilities, what does that look like? And transitioning that away from the founder. So we're working that plan. For us, the reason why we decided to be employee owned had a number of reasons. Number one is we want to be independent. We love it. We're a small company. We have 35 employees. Um, and that'll eventually change, but for the time being, we have a strong cohort of people like me that are mid-career that really want to stay independent and make our own decisions. And with that, it's a lot easier, as Patrick was talking about, to make decisions that are long-term, that might have short-term costs. So, it might be a lean year for the business, but we still have employees that have really earned significant pay raises. And it's much easier to have that conversation when you're employee owned or majority employee owned, and make those short-term trade-offs for a long-term gain. And we think that's easier to navigate that way. We also, currently at least, we'll see how this evolves. Um, all the employees that are shareholders are client facing. So, in addition to the alignment that comes with your employees of being employee owned, there's a very strong focus on we all work with clients individually and having that perspective as we're making business decisions and trying to maintain that as part of the culture is super important to us. And then I wouldn't say it's a meaningful number. It's not definitely not a majority. But when we're onboarding new clients or people are interested in working with us, or long-term clients who have just seen the firm grown substantially since they came on board 20 plus years ago, they ask us about this. They say, you know, I'm in my 60s, I'm in my 70s. I want to stay with you for the long term. What are your corporate plans? And without fail, they always really gravitate towards our plan to stay employee owned. That's been very important to them. Some of the challenges that come with that, it's been, it's a big financial investment. Patrick was talking about that, so it's not as big as Patrick's was, but it's still a big investment. And so you have different risk tolerance. You have the capacity to buy in, like Patrick was talking about, how much of your personal assets you really want tied up in this business. And so navigating that piece with onboarding new shareholders, it takes some delicacy, especially, as a business matures and the formulations change, everything else, the business just becomes more valuable. And so how do you make sure that people that are coming up the rungs get their foothold in, so they can take advantage of the growth of the business is super important. I think navigating, somebody like me who was hired as an employee, I have a naturally different attitude towards risk than somebody who starts their own business. And so there's definitely some thoughts around founders behave differently than the next generation and what that looks like and navigating that and figure out what your plan is for that. And it's a big investment of the firm, coaching new employees and mid-career people to be able to have the skill sets to become shareholders and make business decisions is super important, and it's a big challenge. And then I think finally the other challenge that I think is definitely worth talking about is what I alluded to with the governance structure. Um, we have a founder of the firm who's still here, still majority owner. You have me who's the co-president. You have a management team who does what, whose decision is that really involved with. We have weekly meetings about that right now to talk about that. And one of the things is like, hey, did I make a decision that I shouldn't have made? Did you make a decision we shouldn't have made? Or is it employee transparency, visibility? It's a lot easier to do when it's a founder, than when it's a cohort of people making decisions. And so making sure the employees are on board and know what's going on. So that's been fun to navigate too. And Canute, I think that is me enough rambling for right now.
All right. Well, thank you, John. Um, that was a very good overview. Um, Next, Brian, I think you're up.
Thanks, Canute. And I'll try to go through some of our history too. And I know I have some of the very similar themes to both Pat and John, so I'll try not to double up on some of that for the sake of efficiency here. So, hi everybody. I'm Brian Martin. I'm from Accredited Investors Wealth Management up in Minneapolis. For those who don't know, Accredited, we're a $4 billion RIA up here. And we were founded in 1987 as one of the early fee-only firms in the industry, by two founders, Ross Levin and Will Heipel. And one thing that's interesting here, Canute, I don't know to what extent you know this connection, but John and Pat and I all know each other, because we are in with our firms, a study group of firms that get together for a long time. So Ross Levin, one of the founders of our firm, and Cheryl, the founder of Abacus, they formed a study group 30 plus years ago. They called it 2020. And they were a group of the early fee-only planning firms. So I think it ties interestingly to this topic that we ended up as the three firms on here. And I should say that Tom and Madera joined the group a number of years ago as well. So I think that study group has largely been working on through various different people involved, the idea of succession planning and remaining employee owned for probably the last 20 years together. And so it's just interesting that kind of through Knut's, connections and network, we all ended up here on this panel talking about the topic together. So anyways, fast forward with Accredited, 38 years later, I mentioned about 4 billion under management. We work with about 600 families up here, mostly in the Twin Cities. We have a team of 60 here and 10 shareholders of the firm. So we have our original founders and 8 generation 2 shareholders, and that number's climbing. So a little bit about kind of our journey towards succession planning and the path we're on with employee ownership. Ross and Will really began thinking about succession planning probably 25 years ago, and at the time did entertain the idea of outside sales, either partial or full. And I'll talk a little bit about kind of some of the thinking why, but eventually settled on selling internally and remaining independent, hopefully indefinitely. We talk a lot about not using the term succession planning here internally with sustainability planning. So the idea is how do you create a sustainable firm? So they set out on a path to remain independent, do internal sales, and those first share sales to the Generation 2 owners that I mentioned earlier happened in 2012 and have been happening annually ever since. So that first share sale kicked off what I kind of think of as 3 different swim lanes for what we're talking about as succession planning here, to allow firms to remain employee owned. You have ownership of the firm in the first swim lane, and that's kind of gets the headlines. So for us, that's internal sales. We have a agreement here within our shareholder group. We have a pricing formula that's used every year based on EBITDA, very similar to a lot of firms out there. What's a little bit unique about our situation is we have a share sale that's fully financed by a local bank here, or local banks plural, that we've had relationships with. So that allows the Generation 2 shareholders to come in without their own capital. So they have 100% financing that is guaranteed by the firm in order to get that deal, but that makes it a lot more doable for some of the folks joining. I mentioned we have 8 Generation 2 shareholders now that are buying those shares in annual share sales, and we have a process to elect more with the goal of continuing to grow that group. So that's the ownership track. That's kind of the headline, like I mentioned, but there's 2 others. The second, and John mentioned this, leadership of the firm. And so our plan there is transferring again internally and to advisor leaders. So our decision a long time ago was we want the firm to be led by client-facing advisors. Not to say that makes up our entire leadership team, because it doesn't. But the firm will be led by client-facing leadership. So Generation 2 joined the executive committee sometime around 2014-ish. As a step in this leadership transition. Then I'd say the next big milestone was we adopted EOS as a system here internally in 2019. And I just mentioned that because that kind of jump-started the process and pushed it forward quite a bit faster. And then we formally transitioned leadership of the firm in 2022. I now lead the firm as a managing partner with Becky Krieger. So we're in co-managing partner roles, and that's been the plan, ever since soon after we adopted that EOS structure here. We kind of worked through what that might look like. And so that's been a continuing process of transition, though. So Ross and Will remain engaged in the business. They remain on the executive committee and on the board. So it wasn't this moment in time where our firm handed over, but really this gradual transition where, Becky and I ramped up for a while, then eventually took over the leadership titles, and now there's a slow ramp on the other side as well, but that's a very gradual process. And then the third swim lane, which I think is really important, and honestly one that I think is both the longest and for us has been probably the most challenging, is the client relationship transition. So, um, you know, I mentioned both Ross and Will have been and remain very active in the business, and a big part of that is working directly with clients. And so what we are working on alongside, really working through this leadership change in the business is working over a long period of time, the changeover in client relationship leadership. And I think there's a couple models you can take there. There's kind of the big bang event, or there's this gradual transition, and that's the one we're on, and that just takes a lot more time. So let me talk a little bit about why we made the decision to remain independent and why we continue to make that decision in our strategic planning. And first and foremost, I think ultimately it was a client-driven decision. So Ross and Will made their original decision years ago, and now we've had a generation two of owners that have agreed with that decision, want to remain on that path. Really because of the belief that the clients are what built the firm. Great clients that allowed us to continue to do what we do because they were both bringing more assets to our firm, but also referring people in their networks to help grow our firm. That the growth of the firm has really been about them and focused on them. And the best way for us to continue to focus on serving them the best we can is to maintain full autonomy over what that service model looks like. And that's the best way for us to really guarantee that we can stay true to that mission, is to remain fully independent. Not to say there aren't firms that have gone to an outside sale that don't remain true to that mission, but this is the way for us to be able to control our destiny in that sense. And for us, it's, I think, a little more extra important because we know we have a unique service model. Just based on the clientele that we're working with, we like to do things like innovate on our service model, be more hands-on in areas that don't necessarily make sense on to the bottom line always, but we think makes sense for our client relationships. And we hire a big range of talent, or some people that do have relationship focus, but a lot of people that are technicians and want to work and maybe a little bit more behind the scenes because of the hands-on work that we're doing. And we fear loss of autonomy on things like that. So being able to invest in things that are purely infrastructure for our clients, or things as simple as we have a longstanding kind of cultural value here that we reimburse clients for anything that even resembles a planning error on our behalf. And as an employee-owned firm, we have full autonomy to do that. In some cases, even when it may be a stretch to call it our fault. We just think that's an important thing of our relationship with our clients, and like to be able to control how that plays out. So the key to making this work, I think, long term, was making the internal market attractive. And I hear when we're out there talking with other firms about succession planning, this is a big issue out there. And so I think that required a few things. First, the reasonable multiple. So Ross and Will, from the get-go, set this program up with a multiple that was below what you could go achieve out there in the open market. But also good terms with banks. So I mentioned we have relationships with banks. Will, one of the founders, has really taken it upon himself to manage and work those relationships, and has been able to get the terms that we have today. And that's a big part of making this work. And then lastly, I think the third component that you have to have is steady organic growth. So we are fortunate enough, and this is in an area that I'm lucky enough to have a partner like Becky who leads in a really visionary way. And we've continued to grow through this whole succession period. And I think that has helped make this market internally a lot more attractive and make the firm more sustainable. And so when you get those three components in, I think it can be a great deal for both generation one, selling the shares over time, and generation two. I think creating wealth for setting up a arrangement that creates wealth for generation two, but also allows generation one to ride the wave of a firm that continues to grow on their way out, I think is a win-win, and makes it more likely that the transaction can be more about the partnership and the future of the firm rather than the financials. And then lastly, thinking about advantages, why stay independent? I think both John and Pat mentioned this, but we're really finding that it's helping us when it comes to our firm growth efforts. That especially in our local market, we're really seeing the number of direct competitors for us, just based on our size and the clientele we work with, continues to fall. That more and more are being acquired, and more the message out there in our community that we are fiercely independent is resonating with potential clients. And I don't think that was something we necessarily saw in the vision of this path early on, but it's definitely become a big part of our messaging, and now a big part of our identity out there in the community. So then lastly, just to kind of wrap up, I think we've all talked a lot about why we see this as the best path and the advantages. I want to just kind of briefly talk about what I think some of the challenges are out there. So I think just from a high level, the number of components you have to get right is really hard. And that's why I wanted to focus on those three different swim lanes. In a service firm, you have to get the ownership transfer right, you have to get the firm leadership transfer right, and you have to get the transfer of all of the client relationships right. I think if you get one of those three wrong, the whole thing falls apart. So it is a challenging thing and takes a lot of work to make sure you're getting to the right place in each of those three swim lanes. And for us, that has been a big part of it. That I mentioned Ross and Will started this in 2012, and this has been a journey of constant iteration. So every component of the plan to be employee owned has changed over the years, whether we're talking about what the leadership team looks like, what the board does, how the firm's governance works, how we elect new shareholders. I think we're on our third or fourth version of that. So you have to be willing to continue to modify and stick with it and work through it. And then, John talked about this, and I couldn't agree more, but just managing the at times conflicting interest between the two generations is really challenging. The balance between profit and investing in the business is complicated during a sale process. And, we've been in a sale process for 13 years and will continue to be for a number of years. That, it's not just about impact on distributions from the firm every year, but you have a share sale that's impacted every year. So decisions as simple as investing in your building or investing in new talent aren't always that simple. And you have to have open conversation and be willing to work through the pros and cons and the considerations with each of those. And John also mentioned this, but I think it's much harder to do this while generation one is still involved, and working through that dynamic of both generations being essentially in leadership positions at the same time. But I also think that's in the best interest long-term of the firm. It gets to the best outcome and in the best interest of the clients. And at the end of the day, that's what we kind of set out to do here is how do we make this as good as possible for our clients? So ultimately, my belief is if you have the G2 talent and the willingness and the desire, it's hard to see an argument that selling to an outside owner is better for the families that you serve and you're committed to serve in your firm. That said, I also don't think it's for everyone. I mean, I think all those conditions have to be right for it to be the right answer for a firm. You have to have uh, the right folks to hand it off to internally and that have a vision to carry on what you started, and you have to have the right financial situation for that market to be attractive. And I think there are two different models, and um, that's why Pat talked about Madeira's model, where they're really the answer when some firms don't have either the resources or the right people to hand over these firms to. And in that case, I think the best thing for your clients is to find a great firm like Madeira that can be their home going forward, versus kind of an unknown. So um, remaining employee owned by the employees you have today isn't necessarily everyone's path. It's the one we ended up on and the one we agree with more. But I think it's important to just say there's others out there, and even if you have pretty similar outcomes in mind.
Great. Well, thank you. And I'm looking at who has joined us, and I'm not seeing very many journalists as I had expected and hoped for. I invite those others uh, who joined to come forward with some questions. But first, in the spirit of how I thought about this group, you guys are the experts. And so that I open the floor to each of you to ask the other two speakers any questions that you found that arose from their presentation. But before we do that, um, I want to start, Brian, on your emphasis on the client's perception of what this means for them, and maybe it's in a sense the prospective client's perception in terms of the discussions you have. And I wonder if you could give us a little bit more detail on, to the extent that you feel you understand how they look at the difference between what you're offering as opposed to someone down the street or across the city who has been acquired by another firm. I guess I'm curious as to how much it is similar or not similar to the traditional conflict of interest, which fired individuals like Will and Ross 30 years ago to go fee only, to get rid of a major conflict of interest. So anyway, if you could delve into that, and John. John and Pat, if you want to follow, please do. But I'd like to get a better feel for what you think those perceptions are about in terms of the difference.
Well, what we find is, I think the word independence really resonates with them, whether we're talking to our clients that already work with us or prospective clients, that when they're either talking to other firms or actually working with other firms that are acquired, I think what feels uncomfortable for them is this idea of being in relationship with an unknown owner, that's behind that acquisition, and they're looking at their relationship with us as a long-term relationship that they'd like to plan on. And I think John spoke to that earlier. And so almost always, right now when we're talking with clients about how our relationship's going, or prospective clients, they're asking us about what the future of our firm looks like, and being able to say, here are the 8 owners of the firm. They've all been here 15 plus years, and we have this common vision, is a lot more comforting for folks looking for a long-term relationship than some vague answer about the mission of the acquirer, which I think some have a compelling story about, a model they'll be serving in the same way that the firm always has, and many have either an unknown or definitely an investment driven model. And we have found that uncertainty is really uncomfortable. And I think it's a little bit different than the story we also kind of tell, us versus maybe the wirehouses. But some similar themes where, if you can be close to the owners, it establishes a trust and, oh, they're looking out for me, or, oh, this is who I'm in a relationship with, versus kind of the impersonal of either the big bank or the big PE fund that's behind this, or the big roll up that's behind this firm. And we're in a deeply, deeply personal business.
Yeah.
So to me, that's kind of the thing that resonates and what we hear from uh, definitely prospects, but honestly, our existing clients are asking about it a lot as well, just
Gotcha.
based on how much it's in the news.
Pat, John, anything else to add to?
I would just really amplify it's a deeply personal relationship, and people, everything about this person, and they are trusting you with their livelihood. They're trusting you with all their money, and they're trusting you to take care of them when they can't take care of it themselves, or when their spouse can't take care of it themselves. And so it's really, really important to them that they have a vision of like, everything's fine now, but 10 years from now, when it might not be, or the same people are going to be in the chair, or at least if they're not in the chair, or the same people running the company. Um, it's and then it's just like it's sure like, oh, my vet got bought out by a PE, and I can't get a hold of anybody anymore.
Yeah.
Right. And so it's something like that triggers, and like I don't want that experience with my deeply personal relationship.
Yeah. Okay. Pat?
Yeah, I just quickly add to what both Brian and John said. Having gone through this, on the one side, I think Brian said it, being really close to ownership, is really key. I mean, people love that. And they feel like they're actually heard when they bring up either, something that they wish would be different, or, a request, or even praise. They're getting to the top of the food chain. The one thing though that we noticed was, when we started down a road where, it was very obvious sitting in the room that my partner was many decades older than I was. The question often became, well, what happens when Chaz retires? Right? And you get those questions, and to have a solution for that, and then making good on that, where people don't, they may have a different firm that they're working with in terms of a name, but the team that they're used to working with, the experience, the responsiveness, if you can make that stay the same, it does give a level of comfort that they know, okay, I understand what the plan is here now, that we're part of a larger firm. The point of that is so I can continue to work with the same team that I've gotten used to working with. And it also, they need to see some benefit, whether it's increase in technology, more services, et cetera. If you do it right, I think it can actually enhance that relationship. Though everything that Brian and John just said, I think is critically important. At the end of the day, top of the food chain is going to be our clients, because they're the ones that we have the fiduciary obligation to. They're the reason we do what we do. And you have to show a path and communicate it and make good on it, that whatever path you choose, it's going to be beneficial to them.
Gotcha. Are there any questions from those who are listening in? If so, let us hear if you have any. In the meantime, John, you mentioned something which certainly struck me, among all the things that have been said, and that is your own personal experience. That when you were first hired, you were an employee, as opposed to my take is that you didn't think of yourself as a potential owner when you were first hired.
I was 24.
Come on, John. Come on. But I think that is a huge point, because you're going from an employee, and even though Cheryl wasn't running a Fortune 500 firm, but going from an employee to becoming an owner/entrepreneur. And I think it's that change, is my sense, is that what maybe you were referring to. But I'd like to hear more about that, and maybe this also gets to something that that Brian said, when he spoke about the absolute key point of having the right group of G2 to make this happen, and suggesting that if you didn't have the right group of G2, don't even try it. I mean, don't go there. That's my take on it. Brian can jump in, of course, too. But talk a little bit more about that, because I think that's interesting.
Yeah, I think a couple of points. One, at Abacus, if you are asked to become, if you are interested in becoming a shareholder, it's a 2-year process.
Yeah.
And it gives you the chance to work on what we all like. We come to an agreement of like, hey, let's work on these few things together. And then we'll help you decide if you want to do this or not. But it helps you morph your identity a little bit over those 2 years. There's a difference in being an employee and there's a difference in being an owner. And so it gives you a little chance to grow into like what that looks like, and it's a little bit different. I mean, I've been in it for 10 years. I'm still growing into it. So trying to figure that out, I think that's imperative. And then I think the founder needs to give grace to the next generation, that you're not having a bunch of entrepreneurs at the next level. Like, that's, if you want a bunch of entrepreneurs at the next level, they wouldn't have been a hire for you. They would start their own business. And so as the business matures, you want somebody with entrepreneurial spirit who's going to grow the business, right? You want somebody who's going to be creative and do all that sort of stuff. But the next gen, by and large, isn't going to have the same risk tolerance. It, their identity might be slightly less entangled with the company, all that sort of things. They didn't build it. Like, they're building it with you, but they didn't start it.
Yeah.
And so I think just being aware of that and giving each other grace for it is super important.
Thank you. Brian, do you have anything else to add to on that point?
Well, and I would just say, the only thing I would add, I agree with a lot of the things that John said. I think this one of the areas where we've probably stubbed our toe and continue to learn and try to get better is, what exactly are you looking for in a new shareholder? And our criteria, I think, started largely based on, contributions you were making to client relationships. Is how strong were you in that sense? And we've evolved to think more about, are you someone that shows signs of acting like a business owner, and stepping above and beyond kind of your role to think about the greater good. And even then, we've continued to evolve to say, maybe it's not just about getting the same profile, but actually thinking about, okay, where are the gaps in our group as an ownership, and should we be favoring some of those characteristics to round out our group? And we have the luxury of, being a big group already, and being able to add more and more different personalities, so that you don't have to have a single person that is going to have all the characteristics that made the founders so successful. Well, no, as a group, we want to embody the personalities that this business needs. And that gives you a lot more flexibility and freedom to pick different strengths and weaknesses. But I still go back to, you still have to have the people who are going to have the capacity to run the business, and as importantly, or more importantly, take over the client relationships that you have. And if those people aren't internal, that's when I think it makes sense. You just have to look in other directions.
Right. Okay. Just one other point, and has nothing to do with what this last question was, but Brian, you referenced some things that you like to do internally, in the area of improving or enhancing client service, that on a spreadsheet, maybe you couldn't justify the cost for doing that. Those are my words, but I think that was your point. And I'm just curious, do you have a couple of examples that sort of stand out in that category?
Well, there's a number of people from our team here, who I'm sure would be happy to jump in and share some of these experiments. But I think the last couple of years we've been experimenting with what we call a standard of care, where basically we're defining what are some of the elements we need to make sure are being executed for our clients, and tracking those in our CRM. And initially, these are things that slow everyone down to make sure, oh, did I do that in the way the standard of care has defined it? And now we're to the point where I think that's up and running a little bit better, but now we're working on more of a scorecard and tracking element to go with it. And again, rolling it out is slowing everyone down. And John talked about, and I think Pat as well talked about having a long-term view,
Yeah.
and the relationship we have with the firm's owners and the clients allows us to have a long view on some of this experimentation. And then outside of that, there's just some services that things we stick our nose into that I think certain investors would come in and say, hey, that's not really a bang for your buck. Like, do you really need to be that involved in, renewing homeowners insurance and decisions on deductibles? It's not the sexy stuff, but if that's certain clients really value that, that's what
Yeah.
we appreciate being able to spend a lot of time on.
Yeah. All right. I'll reiterate the invitation that you just made to your colleagues if they want to jump in and add another some additional color to those sorts of activities. Um,
Well, I could just say that we probably are all thinking of dumb mistakes we've made that we had to, first make the client whole and then figure out what happened. So I could probably do another hour on all of those. But I would say that with the same thing that Brian had in mind, our tax services, tax margins are compressed
yeah.
dramatically
Yeah.
to prepare tax returns. And that is not a business that's going to be a wildly profitable venture for us, but is such an important part of enhancing the client relationship. We fill the void by doing that, building it out with really capable people and making it something that we're going to invest in so we have something to solve a client issue. So just kind of tapping on to Brian's point of maybe doing something that doesn't uh, change the profits of the firm necessarily, but does enhance the client relationship, which leads to stickier relationships, which is what we're all after,
Right.
adding value.
And
Right.
Pat, I wish advocates had the resources to do it. Like that's something that we really want to do. To your point, you're bigger than we are. We can't pull that off yet, but man, we wish we could. What we're doing right now that I'm laughing about because it's a pain point is we make estimated tax payments for our clients, and we're doing that right now. And it's one of those things that when it goes right, they like it, but they don't love it. They just kind of expect it. When it goes wrong, you're writing those checks.
Gotcha. Gotcha. All right. We are near the top of the hour, so I'm going to ask each of the speakers if they have any sort of final comment to everything that you have already said uh, in this hour. John?
Well, I had a question for Brian if he can do it quickly. We'll see. The pain point of moving clients from the departing generation to the next generation, it's not easy. Did you have any guidance on that?
I wish I did. I mean, like I said, I think that's the hardest one.
It is.
Um, I think what we have in the cases where we found it works best is it has to be led by those, the founders transitioning off those relationships, and it should be a gradual process of it doesn't necessarily work to just not show up to one meeting, but can you dial it back to two-thirds of the meeting and then the first third of the meeting and then, every other. And, luckily there are a decent percentage of our client base we've been able to do that. But there's still a big chunk to go. And so it's slow. It's a slow process, and I don't have a formula for speeding it up. So sorry.
Gotcha. All right. Pat, do you have any final comment?
No, I think this is an important discussion. Most of our firms, if not every RIA, is having some level of this discussion, whether very informally or in, great detail.
Yeah.
So I think this is this I found it to be, in terms of the subject matter you suggested, Knut, a valuable topic because I'm sure a lot of folks, if they haven't gotten exposure to it, value what the perspectives of the three of us have been. So I just thought it was a worthy topic and appreciate you bringing it up.
Great. All right. Well, good. Well, thank you, gentlemen, and we will follow up. But and thank those who joined us. I hope you found it useful, and enjoy the rest of your day and the rest of your week, please.
Thank you.
Thanks, Knut.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, guys.
Okay.
See ya.
Yeah. Bingo. I think it went. I think it went quite well.
And you've got another one